I think a lot of chatter in the back end of Garage Gym Athlete amongst the team on this one. Said Kyle recommended it, which it was pretty good. So the name of the book is Ingredients: The Strange Chemistry of What We Put in Us and on Us. And it is, I didn't practice the author name before I started, but it's George Zaidan. Did I get it right?
Yeah, I think good.
All right. Close enough. So I'll just read a quick blurb from the Amazon page here. Ingredients offers the perspective of a chemist on the stuff we eat, drink, inhale, and smear on ourselves. Apart from the burning question of whether you should eat those Cheetos, Zaidan explores a range of topics. Here's a helpful guide. Stuff in this book. How bad is processed food? How sure are we? Is sunscreen safe? Should you use it? Is coffee good or bad for you? What's your disease horoscope? What is that public pool smell made of? What happens when you overdose on fentanyl in the sun? What do cassava plants and Soviet spies have in common? When will you die? So really, if I just had to cover broad strokes here on this book, I think the subtitle does it the best justice. So he does talk about processed foods. He talks about smoking and vaping. He talks about sunscreen. He talks about the sun. He talks about a lot of stuff. And I think that it was a refreshing book in a way that, we can get really worried about things, right? Like, what's good, what's bad, and how much does it actually matter? And that's something I've always wondered about, because if I ever meet somebody who stresses a lot about food, like I try and eat healthy, but I even got asked this question 2 weeks ago by my mother-in-law. I forgot what I ate. I wasn't anything bad. She was just asking a general question. She's like, when you eat something unhealthy, she's like, do you have a lot of guilt surrounding that? Like, do you feel bad and all this stuff? She was asking me that. And I was like, absolutely not. If I eat something bad, I think obviously I picked it, so it's delicious, at least in my mind, and I don't care. I have no worry about that whatsoever. And I think that's great. But if I did have what she was talking about, some sort of mental connection to where I eat a cheeseburger and I'm like, oh, I think I can feel my heart slowing down, and this is going to be so bad. There are people who think like this, and they're basically psychological disorders. And I think if you think that way, the psychological side of that is more damaging for you than what you actually ate. Like what 100%. Your body's like, whatever, we can deal with this. But in your brain, you're like, this is awful, and the brain is powerful. I won't say what happens from there, but the brain is powerful. And I think it can do a lot of things. So you got to be careful with how you feel about these things. And he kind of talks about whether or not we should even care that much, about processed food and all this other stuff. So that's kind of just me opening the door to it. I think we all have a good amount to say on it. So whoever wants to go first, dive in. Kind of what was your takeaway on Ingredients?
I think Kyle should go first since you recommended it.
I don't know. I might just take up all the time that we have to talk about. I really could say yours. Yeah, I really could say a lot of things about it. Could go on and on about it. I loved it. I thought it was a great book. If you get the audio version, which of course I did, if you've listened to the podcast once, then you know that that's how I do it. But if you get the audio version, the author actually reads it, and which is also something that's not normal for this type of book, for a science-based book or just a nonfiction book in general. Like typically an author or a publisher will have a professional reader read it for the audio version. But
as a nerd wrote it, right? And they're like not okay with like reading it, but they are okay with writing it. Yeah.
Yeah. This guy read it himself, and he's hilarious. He puts a lot of jokes and puns and things like that in the book. And I think because of that, I think that's a big reason why I enjoyed it so much, was he made it accessible. And I think there's a lot of he's a chemist by trade. So he's a major nerd, but
went to MIT.
Yeah. He did his, grad work and stuff at MIT. So it's like, he's a nerd of nerds, maybe, I guess you would say. In my mind, that's what you are. You're a nerd.
Don't worry, you offended the 2 listeners who went to MIT who are listening to
Anyway, So yeah, but you expect somebody who has that kind of training and that kind of knowledge in a very specific field and has a very narrow, a very narrow focus on the work that he does to kind of have kind of bland. It's kind of hard to get through a lot of technical jargon, things like that. And we've read books like that and covered books like that on here, but this one is not that way. He does a very good job of mixing the entertainment and the human factor into it, as well as keeping the technical jargon there. You can't get away from the technical jargon. It's going to be there. But I felt like he kept it to a minimum and kind of made it accessible to the masses. So I really enjoyed it. 10 out of 10 on the entertainment factor. But he does talk about, as far as highly processed food, he talks a lot about how research is actually done, how it's actually carried out, which was fascinating to me since we cover studies on here all the time. How research is done, how research is published, the peer review process. He dives into that as well, which is really good to understand. And honestly, for our listeners, since we're covering studies on here all the time, this is a great book for you to read just to understand the back end of the studies that we're covering, and that we can kind of, put at least some measure of faith in studies. If they've been published, it means they've been through a peer review process. They still could have pitfalls. They still could be, inaccurate as far as the things that they measured, or, maybe it's not definitive proof of something, but at least it's been through a peer review process of, that's what scientists do. They just take each other's research and try to poke holes in it. And it's like, that's the whole point. And everybody does that to each other. So his conclusion was kind of ultra processed food. The jury's still kind of out on whether it's actually definitively bad for you or not. And which was kind of his conclusion at the end of the book. But he does believe that there's enough evidence to at least say, it's probably bad for you. But as a chemist, not as a health coach, as a chemist, he's saying, I'm looking at the research and there's a case to be made that it's bad for you, but it's not, we can't be 100% sure right now. I, as a coach and as an athlete who can tell you it's bad for you, you shouldn't eat it. You should be eating whole foods and shaping up on those things. But anyway, I thought he did a really good job, and it's a great book. I think everybody should read it. So I'm going to cut myself off now. Sorry. I'm going to pick Ashley next.
Yeah, I think the dude was hilarious as well. I said I never thought a chemist could make me laugh so much. And Kyle talked a little bit about the technical jargon. There's a point where he talks about photosynthesis, and he gives you the straight textbook definition. And then he was like, did you just fall asleep? Good. So did I. Let's talk about the layman's terms of it. He was really good at just keeping it light and kind of, yes, giving you technical jargon, but also explaining it in layman's terms. So all of us normal people can understand what he was saying. He also has some YouTube videos. So go check him out on YouTube. They're really, really short clips and they're really fun to watch. And it's exactly what it's on this book. It's on Sunscreen. There's one on coffee. I was really laughing last night when I was checking them out, but I think he made a valid point on nutrition, that studies on nutrition are ever changing. It's never one size fits all kind of thing. It's just, even he talked about coffee and the differences of what people found on coffee, the different studies was astounding to me.
Within days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he made a great valid point of that. And I think too, what I loved about that is that he kind of challenges you to say, hey, just because you read this on one thing, so if you read an article or a study or whatever you read, don't just take that and make that your Bible and only follow that because that's the thing you read. Do a little digging of your own and know that it's probably going to change in a couple of years anyways.
He calls it the bridge of truth, right? It's each study that you read is one brick in this bridge, and it's only one piece that's building an entire thing. Then you have to see the whole thing. And it takes a long, long time for the bridge to get built. So,
yeah. I liked how he talked about too, like with different studies. He's like, well, sometimes they're in like a contained part and they're not actually like studying people that are in their actual living habitats. Like, wherever they live, like they take these people out of their natural habitat and like, anyways, really good book. A couple funny points. The sunburn lady made me cringe. Oh my gosh, I could
Don't
not
fall
even...
asleep in the sun, people.
Oh my gosh,
don't do it.
Yeah, just read it.
She went into a coma in the sun.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
because of the amount of
fentanyl.
That's right. That was going into her bloodstream because of the sun.
Yeah,
right.
Because of the heat, and then she was in the sun for 6 hours before they got her. Yeah, and had to go to a burn unit because her skin was so crisp. Anyways, that's that one. And then the chapters on plants, because he talks a little bit about plants, and I see Joe has some of that, so I'm gonna let Joe take most of that. But kind of reminded me of Plant Paradox a little bit of, plants are also really
trying to kill you.
Well, it's a good point. Like they don't have any other way to protect themselves, so they release some chemicals. Oh, and everything has chemicals. I really liked the beginning of definition of like, what's he say? Whole food, organic, hippie is what he calls them.
So, those conversations that he staged were really funny.
Yeah, they were great.
They're really good.
It's funny because it's true.
You're not wrong, Joe.
All right, so yeah, I got a bunch of things that were really, really cool to take away. Start off, like at first going into this book, I thought it was going to be on nutrition because it's called Ingredients. There's a picture of a Cheeto. He took some side tangents that I did not expect. Like I think I mentioned in our chat that he went on a long time about smoking, and I'm just like, yeah, dude, we've known for decades smoking's bad. I don't need to hear all of this about why smoking is bad. Like I get what he was trying to paint a picture and go into like the minute details of each chemical and like the sources, and like kind of also proving the science of how they found out it was, but also how finding out it was at times was either wrong or could be misleading. So either way, like there were some side tangents he had that I just didn't care that much about. But it's still like refreshing and kind of interesting that it was pretty much very unbiased, which is new for when it comes to anything that comes to health, because usually everybody's going to say, we've read a few books by vegetarians and vegans who where they fall in that line after reading their book, and some other bias in that way. He's just a chemist that's talking about chemicals, and he's a huge nerd and makes a lot of nerd references, which is really funny and really cool. But Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, some other pop culture references that
I'm sure you guys got all those. I was like, what?
There were lots of them.
What's he talking about?
According to Jerred, fantasy's all on unicorns.
yeah. So that was really cool. And sunscreen was, even though I didn't care that much about the sunscreen part, there were still some interesting things. Like I realized that Jerred, you could probably be a test subject for sunscreen because he said that they use the most pastiest white people out there.
I saw that in your notes. I didn't think you'd actually use it. So I'm gonna have to get you back. It's gonna be brutal. It's gonna be some random podcast.
I think this week we have the one episode published about the problems episode about sunshine. So it's kind of on brand.
Okay.
Anyway, but the sunscreen was interesting because of he talks about how it's tested and why they say apply twice and stuff, because the amount that is recommended to apply nobody uses, and then all the chemicals that are in it.
I do.
Butter, just like
Got to keep that skin.
Going into the plant part, I really, really liked the metaphor or the connection he used between how embalming fluid and preservatives, because embalming fluid is used to preserve bodies and then preservatives is used to preserve food. And while it's kind of a stretch and kind of hyperbolic, it's still like there's a connection there. And think about that. And whenever you go into your food that has a ridiculously long shelf life, if it's not like something that's canned or jarred, if it's just like in a package, then there's a lot of preservatives in there. And it was just one of those, like where you step back and like, oh yeah, I never really thought about preservatives being like embalming fluid. And again, he talks about the science of those and how they're related. Pretty fascinating stuff he brought up. It was it's also kind of interesting how he had so much, like it felt like at times he had so much doom and gloom, but then his takeaway was just like, don't worry about it. You're probably gonna be fine. Like
It'll probably be. It's
You'll probably be fine.
Like even if you change all these things, even if you change all of these things, you're only gonna live like 3 more years. Like, or just something like that. Like
the older you get, the closer to death you are. I was like, wow, this is
like, is that the takeaway? Yeah. The section on science was pretty crazy and interesting, and something that we kind of know too, because dealing with nutrition and seeing different sides of nutrition and how actual science contradicts a lot of these marketing things that people can use, and science is just used for marketing. And that's how the whole low fat craze came about, because a company hired a scientist to find a reason why they should buy this product and why people shouldn't eat high fat or eat certain fat. And then he designed a study around it, and he goes into the flaws of how science and studies can be. And even when they find blatant math or flaws with studies, it could be years before it's even changed. And by then, damage is done, marketing has been done, and that's just how science is. And I won't say specifically why, but nowadays, with what's going on science-wise, I don't think people want to question it, but they need to realize that science is still, even though hard science people think is objective, there's still scientists who are executing it, which makes it subjective. It's still at the flaws of humans and people reviewing it and how they're designed. So while science can be black and white, it's also not, because of who is handling it. And he just kind of shed light on that, which I always like when these books kind of illuminate you on things that you just kind of just thought like, oh yeah, this study says this study says this, but it's like, well, how did they come about that? How is this whole thing happen? So that was really cool. And let's see, I thought I had one more thing. Oh, well, I don't know how much I want to talk about the chlorine smell, the pool smell. That was the part that kind of grossed me out. Yeah,
read the
if
book,
you want to know,
find out.
Yeah, if you want to know, I don't want to
just leave that as an inside joke.
If you want to know why pool smells the way it does, it's not the chlorine. And yeah, I guess I'll.
You're on a roll.
Yeah.
Oh man.
We can come back. You want me to come back?
Yeah, we can just go ahead. But that was it. And although his takeaway was that processed foods might not be all that bad, because one of his main points was that, like, he kept on going over and over. It's like, what is a processed food? People can't define a processed food. He even said that at one point, a potato is a processed food because of they used to be toxic and they had to process it to get the toxins out in order to eat it. And it's just a potato. So, like, by technical definition, because of his sciencey nerd brain, so many things are processed foods. But so it's hard to make a clear study to say, okay, this is a processed food. So this is what's going to cause that. That study that he mentions, where the intensive one that was in Maryland for like 30 days, sounds pretty interesting. It would be kind of cool to read more about that and some of their takeaways and how.
I think we covered that one a long time ago.
Really? Might have. But how, like, even though they weren't give them parameters on how much to eat, the people who ate the processed foods ate like 500 calories more. But even though he wasn't able to and didn't quite say that processed foods cause issues and death and stuff, I think processed foods cause X, which cause Y, which cause this. So I think it's a chain reaction that processed foods do, which it would be really hard for them to say, any person to say it's their fault, it's that fault. It's like, no, they died because of this. Well, they had this because of this, and well, they had this because they ate a whole bunch of Cheetos and crap. So while it's one of those, does correlation meet causation, which I think in a way it does. But either way, processed foods can cause a whole lot of bad things. Not necessarily if you eat a bunch of these things, you're just going to die.
Well, doesn't he put them in categories too? It's towards the beginning of the book where he's like, this is category 1, the least amount of processing, category 2, just like how far food is from being real food, I guess, is like the.
Yeah, and they have actual ratings. I forgot what the term was, but and I do think that's why we should probably use the term ultra processed in our recommendations of what people shouldn't eat, because everything's processed. Everything's goes through a process. Like, even if I picked a cucumber from my garden in my yard and wash it, that is a process. You know what I mean? Like that is processing cucumbers. And so really it's the ultra process. We all kind of know what it is. It's like, just like I kind of urge athletes, it's like, you know what you should do and what you shouldn't do. Like, do I really need to like spell it out and like write the 10 commandments for you? Or should you just like be smarter when you're trying to eat food? And most of the time people know, right? They know. But can I dive in, Joe, or did you have any more?
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay. So I loved the book. I actually was struggling with it for a long time as I was going through it, because each chapter I was like, okay, like I'm not getting any strong takeaways. And it was like chapter after chapter, I was like, no takeaway. And so I was like, I really like the author and this is very entertaining, but I'm like, if we don't get somewhere, I'm going to like end up not liking this book. But then he wraps it up really well in chapter 10. And so I think that's what kind of made the book decent. And I'm actually going to pull some data from that, and I won't rehash anything the teams talked about, but yeah, very, very well written for being a chemist, coming from MIT, being the most technical information you could possibly cover. And I would rate this as like one of the funniest books I've read in a while, you know? And so getting into things, the takeaways from the book at the end, ultra processed food. And this is just, we're looking at the data that he's presenting, not me. Ultra processed food can equate to 1.3 years of life lost. If you're wealthy in the top 1%, you're going to live an average of 10 to 15 years longer than the bottom 1%. Very interesting. Then he covered the 5 behaviors, and this is from a giant study that he talks about at the end: smoking, physical activity, obesity, alcohol, and diet. So smoking, I'm not going to cover that a lot. We all know you shouldn't smoke. Don't vape either. Like don't do either one. Just don't do it. Physical activity. If you do 3.5 hours of moderate to vigorous activity, those people lived 8 years longer than those who did no exercise at all. So if you're planning on no exercise, if you're just doing something like daily over decades challenge at the 200 level, that could add 8 years to your life from the baseline of doing nothing. But then it even goes down to, if you exercise 0.1 to 0.9 hours per week, your survival boost goes up 4 years. So it's like whatever you can do. And it's going to be like, if you went on one walk today for lunch and that's all you did this week, and you can stay consistent with that, that's a 4-year boost. And then if you want to try really hard and do what we're doing, that's an extra 4 years. So I think that it's interesting when you equate it to years like this. Then obesity, if you have BMI greater than 35, your lifespan is 4 to 6 years shorter than those with a BMI of 23 to 25. And if your BMI is right at 25 or 26, something like that, you had 1 year shorter lifespan than those in the 23 to 25 range. Alcohol I found very interesting. So if you don't drink at all, 0 drinking alcohol, or 30 grams a day, had roughly the same lifespan, which was 2 years shorter than those who drank 5 to 15 grams per day of alcohol. So you should drink a little bit of alcohol, 5 to 15 grams, according to the science. Go, Joe.
All right, there's the payback.
There it is. I was waiting. I saw my opportunity.
All right,
alcoholic of the group.
Joe's going to outlive all of us.
But I will say, Joe doesn't drink that much. All right. He's drinking a beer on the podcast. Okay. And then going into diet, the healthiest was, if you're eating like a healthy diet, 45-year increase over those who had the worst diet. And so the most interesting part of the book, and this is kind of my last point, was they talk about the people who are the absolute worst category, which is morbidly obese, chain smoking alcoholics who eat the worst diet and do less than 6 minutes of physical activity per week. I'm quoting directly from the book. You're in the worst. And you're not even listening to this podcast. If that's you, you're not even here. So I'm not offending anybody. And I'm also not offending that many people, because he says it's approximately 0.14% of Americans who do all those things horribly, right? Morbidly obese, chain smoking alcoholics who eat the worst diet and do less than 6 minutes of physical activity per week. Now, the best, you have a healthy weight, you never smoke, drink moderately, exercise a decent amount, and eat a healthy diet. You have the best chance of survival. And it's like a 20-year difference. And that's only 0.29% of Americans who fit in that category. And I would say a lot of our athletes fit in that category. And I think that that's awesome. But it's no small difference when you're comparing the worst to the best. 20-year difference, and that's after the age of 50. And so what it comes out to being is whether or not you live to 74 or 94. Like that's a huge, huge difference. And so I think all these things add up. And I thought him diving into that data and his takeaways were really strong. But he acted like doing all those things was really hard. I feel like that is like, that's just what you should strive for. I'm not saying it's not hard, but like, what else are you doing? Like if healthy weight, don't smoke, drink moderately. We're not even saying don't drink moderately, exercise a decent amount and eat a healthy diet. Almost doesn't matter what the diet is so long as you're following one. Like, and that's all you got to do. He made it sound like that's really hard to me. I don't think that it's that hard. And so that's awesome. Should be encouraging for a lot of people. And then, don't get so wrapped around the ingredients or the foods. I agree with that to some degree, but I also think that these things matter not in singularity. They matter in the broad spectrum of our lives. Like if you're eating an ultra processed food diet, say that was my diet, but I'm sleeping well, I have great relationships, I'm getting a lot of sun, I drink a lot of water, I exercise daily. Yeah, ultra processed food, probably not that big of a deal. But if you don't have any of those other things figured out, and I'm not even talking about the chain smoking, drinking, all those other things, I'm talking about all these other lifestyle factors, I think these things add up. And so that's why I want to stack the deck in my favor wherever I can and eat healthy and do all these other things because I want to sit around and pretend like I'm going to live to be 94 because I'm doing all this crap. But that's not like I think cancer can hit anybody from what I've seen. I think that you could get in a car accident. Like there are a lot of things, so I don't I've always said, I don't do any of the things I'm doing to try and live to be 94. That'd be awesome. But I do it because I feel good and I want to perform at a high level. I want to be a good father, husband, entrepreneur, like all these things. And so that's why I do these things. I want to perform at a high level. If it gets me to that next level, that's awesome too. But you shouldn't have to worry about it so much. I do think he said, his ultimate kind of takeaway was it's probably not that big of a deal to eat processed food. But if you want to be like, you know what, I'm not going to eat it because I think it might end up being bad down the road, kind of like smoking, then you're probably safe to do that. And I had the same kind of thesis in Killing Comfort, but mine wasn't about ultra processed food. Mine was about technology usage, phone usage, because there are a lot of studies coming about teenage suicide rates and its correlation to screen time. And it's really sad that the highest usage of screen time correlates with more suicide in teenagers. And people can push back and argue and be like, it's correlation, not causation. And I don't give a shit about any of that. It's like, this is something I don't like to see. So I'm just going to stay away from it. And by me staying away from it is of no detriment to me. There is no benefit to spending 6 to 8 hours of my time each day on my phone, And so my thesis is that I'll stay away from it as much as I can. And we'll see what happens. If I'm wrong, cool. I don't know what I did. I didn't miss out on anything. I missed out on some Instagram likes, maybe, I don't know, but that's about it. Right. And so I think this is kind of the same thing. He has a similar idea of maybe just stay away from it. We don't have the definitive studies, but let's just stay away from it because we all know, I just feel like people know these things. I feel like everyone knows technology is headed down a bad path right now. People don't want to admit it. People don't want to admit they're addicted to their phone, all this stuff, but you can see it. It's out there. There are a lot of people like that and they don't realize it and how big of a problem it's going to be, but we all know, we all have this intuitive nature to us. So anyway, if he didn't have chapter 10, I may have rated this a 2, just for 1 for being funny and 2 for teaching me a few things, but 0 takeaways. So down 3 points. But what do you guys think on your rating for this book? Get my calculator out just in case I have to average. Kyle gives it a 5.
I'm giving it 5.
All right. Ashley.
4.5. Use those fractional plates.
All righty.
Oh my
Joe.
goodness.
I wanted to rate it a 4.5, but I don't want to say it's a fractional play. I just might have to drop it down to a 4.
You triggered.
You got a 4 or a 5.
Just can't do it.
Go 4.75 for you, and then you can go 4.5.
He said 4.5. He snuck it in there.
4.5. I was between 4 and 4.5 because while it was super entertaining, there's a lot of awesome stuff about it. A very interesting read. It wasn't like I need to go apply and change this and change this. It was just like that was really cool. And then that was kind of it. But I think it's really cool for other people to listen to. So I'll bump it to a 4.5 just in case it edges somebody to go listen to it.
I will give it a 5. And not from the, like I normally would bump it down for what Joe said. Like, I don't know if I have, like chapter 10 was good, but still I don't have like, you know what, after reading that, I'm going to go implement all these things. But I think it's a great read for a lot of people. And his entertainment and funniness factor gives it that extra half from a 4.5 to a 5 for me, because that book could have really sucked. Like easy. Like if you got the wrong scientist to write that, like we would have been like, Kyle, what the hell were you thinking? Like, but it was really good, and it all had to do with the author himself. And I hope he writes more books because that was really solid. So that brings the team average to 4.75. I don't know if that's the highest that we've rated a book collectively.
I think it is.
Yeah, it's pretty strong.
How do we get to 4.75, guys? What do we have to use? Sorry.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my gosh.
How do I change my rating now?
I think it's always a fractional rating. I don't know if we've landed on whole numbers, but maybe we have. Yeah. So yeah, that's the book. Let's knock out this workout and we can. Thanks for listening to the Garage Gym Athlete podcast. If you want to learn more, go to garagegymathlete.com. You can learn about our training. Let us send you a copy of our book, The Garage Gym Athlete, or you can even get featured on the Garage Gym Athlete podcast. Thanks for listening.